Lies of P, released in 2023, had a pretty unlikely path to success, a relatively unheralded game from an unknown studio that unexpectedly delivered a diamond in the rough, a game that many consider to be the best non-FromSoft Souls-like, which is pretty lofty praise coming from the cult of FromSoft fanboys. Lies of P brought some interesting new innovations to the genre, but for the most part, it was just an excellently executed example of the Souls-like formula, something that scratched the itch that usually only FromSoft can scratch. And as the hype built and word of mouth spread, Lies of P garnered universal acclaim, pushing its way into the mainstream and cementing its place amongst the very best this genre has to offer. But there was one remaining question. What about the DLC? Even before it was announced, there was a general expectation that Lies of P would get a DLC expansion, especially given its eventual popularity and mainstream success. But the wait would continue for some 19 months until Neowiz finally answered that last remaining question. We got a name, Overture, and a vague release date, summer 2025. Then, radio silence. There was a trailer and some social media posts, but no release date, no countdown timer, no active building of hype or anticipation. And then suddenly, the reason for that became clear. During GamesFest 2025, Neowiz released a video that announced that Overture was ready, not tomorrow, not a week from now, right now. And then shortly afterwards, the DLC was unlocked and available for millions of people. It's important to understand, if you don't already, the hype for this was pretty intense. It was not like the 2023 release of the base game. Studio 8 wasn't an unexpected upstart trying to capture attention. There were expectations. People were waiting and had been waiting for a while. And happily, if expectedly, Overture delivered. It's not perfect. Many of the flaws present in the base game make unwanted reappearances in the DLC. The levels are a bit too linear, exploration too simplistic, but mostly, Overture is excellent, easily living up to and surpassing the standard of quality that Lies of P set in 2023. The bosses and enemies are more vicious, with more health and more damage, but the new weapons and Legion arms more than compensate. With a fantastic story that ties together the narrative of the base game into something more than it was before, Overture feels like a fitting close to Lies of P and a fantastic sign of what's to come. The director of Lies of P refers to this DLC as a director's cut, something additive that completes the story, delivering, in totality, Studio 8's vision. I think that's a pretty good metaphor to view the DLC for all of these Souls-likes. Bloodborne, in retrospect, feels incomplete without the Old Hunters. The same is true with all of the other Dark Souls games, and even Elden Ring. These DLCs aren't just optional stories and side quests, they are integral pieces of content that complete the experience, and Overture is cut from that very same cloth. Once you beat it, you'll never be able to play Lies of P again without it. Overture becomes available to the player around Chapter 9 in the base game, as it takes you back to the past to witness a few key events that set up the story. P tries to find the infamous legendary stalker, a woman named Leia, and tries to prevent her death. While doing so, P encounters some of the key players that set events in motion throughout the city of Krat, witnessing the aftermath of the Alchemist Civil War and then finally hunting down Arlecchino to save Leia and Romeo. Obviously, you can't succeed in this task. Most of the game would be fundamentally different if Leia survived or Romeo wasn't turned into the King of Puppets, so the story leans into these themes. P is narratively helpless throughout most of this DLC, able to wield powerful weapons and defeat terrifying monsters, but still shackled to the inevitability of fate. Leia is fated to die of the petrification disease, Romeo is fated to become the King of Puppets, and Arlecchino is fated to be turned into a smoking pile of scrap metal. The dick. But the impossibility of these plot points hangs over the whole story. If we could accomplish our goals, then the main game's story wouldn't happen. We can't win. That lack of agency highlights something both beautiful and tragic about this DLC. We aren't here to stop the events that cause Krat to descend into madness. We're here because Leia made a wish. She wished to see the sunrise one more time with her two apprentices, Romeo and Carlo. So the sum total of your actions, your struggles all throughout the DLC are simply to see a dying woman's wish fulfilled as she reflects on a lifetime of regret with the two people she loved most. Souls-likes are not known for happy stories and happy endings. These are games where completing a questline usually involves the death of the quest giver. From Software and the luminaries of this genre have made a habit of giving you someone or something to care about and then killing them. But Overture's story is brutal even for this genre, and the game even rubs it in. Arlecchino taunts you throughout his fight. He knows you're too late. He knows that no matter what you and Leia do, he's already won. His only goal was to experience the heights of human sensation and emotion. By witnessing the rage and grief of Leia, Romeo's suffering, and the unexpected humanity of P, he has accomplished everything he wanted to. The DLC ends with Arlecchino winning, Leia dying, Romeo being captured and presumably turned into the king of puppets. Meanwhile, Krat is ripe for the chaos that would follow in the base game. Overture's story, while brutal and depressing, is also fantastic, and easily enters arguments about the best narrative of any of these Souls-like DLCs, with fascinating and relatable characters, well-written dialogue, and a gripping drama that has you hooked from start to finish. Unfortunately, that consistent quality isn't present in some of the other parts of the DLC. While some of the bosses are incredible, others are forgettable and needlessly frustrating. Some of the environments are truly unique and engaging, with well-thought-out enemy encounters and rewarding loot, but other areas are simply linear slogs that could leave you stuck, feeling like the game was deliberately trying to wear you down with endless enemies, all of which can kill you in nearly a single hit. I don't mean to be overly critical. The good far outweighs the bad, and combined with the narrative, Overture more than delivers on the promise of its potential. But there is plenty to critique, so let's dive in, starting with the bosses. The bosses are, for the most part, excellent, with standout fights like Arlecchino, Marchiona, Anguished Guardian, and the two-faced Overseer, while fights like Veronique and Lumacchio have elements that are fantastic, but others that are frustrating and obtuse. Lumacchio in particular is emblematic of this problem. His first two phases play out as a precise duel, where you figure out the timings on a series of attacks that are tricky and unusual, but present reliable patterns to learn, only for his third phase to morph almost literally into a drunken brawl as he transforms into a monstrous abomination that flops, flails, and flings itself around in a fight that starts off as a beautiful choreographed duel and ends as a chaotic, incoherent mess. I presume, to some extent, that was the point. The idea of matching gameplay with Lumacchio's journey from composed nobleman to slavering, gibbering horror, but the gameplay just feels clunky and unfun, especially on high New Game Plus levels where he can flop into and kill the player in a single hit. I generally like Lumacchio's fight a lot, if only because the first two-thirds of it are the fun part and the last third is merely tolerable. But there is one more boss fight that feels truly irredeemable. The Tyrannic Predator. Okay, melodrama aside, this boss sucks. I'm not normally very sympathetic to the cries of something is bad because the camera is bad, but Lies of P is the rare exception. Parry timings are so precise and enemy movements can be so challenging to read that lock-on is almost always a necessity, and to have it function this poorly, this frustratingly on a boss as challenging as Tyrannic Predator can be is beyond irritating. It is by far the worst boss of the DLC, and I hope to see it relegated to whatever dumpster they left the bed of chaos in. That being said, there's still plenty to like in general. And while a deep dive into everything that makes each boss fight good is far outside the scope of this video, there are a few things worth highlighting. Number 1, Arlecchino's phase change into phase 2 is some of the most absurd, most ridiculous, most unashamedly anime shit anyone in this genre has pulled off this side of Promised Consort Radahn. I love Arlecchino more than I would have ever imagined. Even as hype built surrounding the epic final boss of the DLC, my expectations were blown away, and a lot of that had to do with this specific phase change attack. Learning its timings was absurdly challenging and probably represents a fairly significant stumbling block for the average player, but surviving it and then turning the tables on Arlecchino at the start of phase 2 is the kind of pulse-pounding epic moment that I play these games for. Arlecchino is truly one of the tentpole Mount Rushmore Souls-like bosses and makes the price of this DLC worth it almost all on its own. Second, Marchiona is truly a brilliant take on the duo boss fight gimmick, giving a clear indicator on when the angel puppet is attacking by changing color on the leash between Marchiona and the puppet was a stroke of brilliance. While I think the execution is a little messy, because functionally it's easier just to stay locked onto Marchiona, the idea to try and make a duo fight that functions properly with lock-on was admirable, and I think resulted in some real innovations in that particular kind of boss design. Third, Ancient Guardian is a perfect example of a spectacle fight that can be fun to play and not just fun to look at. The Guardian is surprisingly quick and dexterous, with numerous fast attacks alongside a leap and 2 differently timed slams, and then phase 2 kicks the action into overdrive as he empowers his spear and starts blasting with magic alongside his other attacks. His timings aren't too hard, and putting the whole fight together usually results in destroying the Guardian's horn, which plays this absolutely ridiculous cutscene. Anyways, it's not the only cinematic boss fight that's actually fun to play, but it is a pretty good example of the formula executed well, with the added plus of the camera not being a total nightmare to deal with, so props to Studio 8. The bosses are overall really good, and present a significant challenge with precise deflection timings, large health pools, and varied movesets, with every fight save the Tyrannic Predator belonging somewhere in the upper echelon of Souls-like boss fights. While the boss fights can be a little uneven, an unexpected standout was the new weapons added in the DLC, which had more variety and enabled more unique playstyles than I had originally anticipated. Every new weapon is extremely engaging to use, with relatively deep movesets that allow for seamless combos, weaving in Fable Strikes and Legion Arm attacks with charged R2s and R1 combos. I was a little stuck in my ways because learning the timings for the Twin Dragon Sword's R2 parry on the new bosses was insanely fun, so I mostly did the DLC with that weapon, but I have absolutely fallen in love with the Pale Knight Sword on my second playthrough, and its synergy with the new shotgun Legion Arm is truly a thing of beauty. But I think I did myself a bit of a disservice because almost every single new weapon is at least interesting, from claw weapons with leaping charged R2 attacks to acid-spewing snakehead maces and even a bowblade, which enables a new ranged playstyle and a totally different way to interact with the combat system. But 2 weapons stand out by far: the Pale Knight Sword and the Monad Rose Sword, although for different reasons. The Pale Knight stands out as a weapon that affirms the combo-based gameplay that Lies of P sometimes skirts around. I think Studio 8 still envisions Lies of P as a more deliberate Dark Souls-like game than it does something more action-focused like Nioh or Kazan. So while a lot of the weapons have flashy fable arts and weapon movesets that allow for some limited R1, R2 combos, for the most part, gameplay in Lies of P is more restrained and focused around patience, controlled aggression, and innate understanding of boss movesets than it is about perfecting combos and chain stunning a boss. But the Pale Knight Sword bridges that gap between deliberate and flashy action in a way that proves immensely satisfying. The Pale Knight is a classic Final Fantasy-esque gunsword with charged attacks that carry the player forward and backwards depending on whether or not they chain the charged R2, but this can be comboed with one of the new Legion Arms, which can be charged and then primed to hold that charged attack for a short period of time, allowing the player to use a charged R2 on the Pale Knight Sword and then seamlessly weave in the charged Legion Arm attacks to take advantage of the player's positioning as a result of the Pale Knight Sword's moveset. The seamless way these two weapons combo together and the way you can use those movements to dodge and position your character makes the two weapons almost impossible to put down once you get the hang of the synergy between them. But where the Pale Knight shines as a synergistic force that enables fluid and fun gameplay, the Rose Sword is just a powerhouse. It is undoubtedly overpowered, but it also has Judgment Cut. I don't think I need to say anything else, maybe something about an approaching storm. In all seriousness, the Rose Sword is appropriately overpowered with a decent R1-R2 combo, but its Fable Arts are where the Rose Sword earns its reputation, with the standard triangle attack being a dash that goes back and forth, which does enable some interesting combos, but the real star is the R1 triangle attack, which, after a pretty long animation, performs Liza P's version of Judgment Cut, which appropriately demolishes whatever you end up unleashing it on. There's not really that much more to say. It has Judgment Cut, it fucks. What do you want from me? In sum, Overture adds a bevy of new weapons with several boss weapons that steal the show, but many other interesting and unique regular weapons that provide a ton of replayability and variety to the gameplay. And now we come to arguably Overture's only true weakness, and unfortunately it's one shared in the base game: level design. The best FromSoft DLCs aren't just where the best bosses and weapons are found, they're also where the best and most memorable environments are found. I really want to emphasize that last part. Places like Dark Souls 2's Broom Tower or the fishing hamlet in the Old Hunters are iconic, classic environments that are still talked about today. There's an opportunity for developers to go crazy crafting unique environmental puzzles and taking advantage of more wide-open areas as the design focuses to just a handful of high-quality levels. I think Overture sort of hits this mark. Especially early on, the zoo and carnival are pretty interesting, with unique enemies that fit the theme of the environment and at least some exploration. The carnival section stands out in particular because of the open aspect of the level design and some pretty interesting exploration mechanics, including one that involved playing carnival games to win prizes. It's nothing crazy or even very engaging, but there was a clear effort to make some of the level design more interesting to engage with, independent of the combat. But as the DLC progressed, the level design became more linear and monotonous, to the point that I felt like some of the DLC areas were actually worse than the base game ones. The Zelator Underground Research Facility in particular stood out as one enormous linear slog from start to finish, with only a handful of shortcuts and little to no meaningful exploration. This continues an existing trend from the base game, where a common complaint was that level design ended up a little too linear and lacked meaningful exploration. I think to some extent that criticism was overblown, but I do think the levels were something of a missed opportunity in an otherwise excellent DLC. Final thoughts. DLC for Souls-like games come with certain expectations. Not everything is going to be Shadows of the Erdtree, but the DLC should be the high watermark of your Souls-like, and although ironically named Overture, this DLC feels more like a climax, a display of skill, technical mastery, and creative force. Not every studio can make a DLC with bosses this good or weapons this interesting while also having a story that ends up being as compelling as it is. And the story really is the main highlight here. There are other games, other DLCs that do what Overture does, even doing it better. Better bosses, better weapons, better levels, but I can confidently say that no other Souls-like developer has crafted a story as compelling. You don't need a Vati Vidya explanation. You don't need an archaeology degree to find the true meaning behind Overture's story. It's right there in front of you. Heartbreaking, tragic, and beautiful. Like I said at the start of this video, DLC is a nebulous term in the video games industry, often an excuse for some multinational corporation to grab some easy cash and improve their profit margin. Overture is not that. Overture is what every single Souls-like DLC should aspire to be. And while it isn't perfect or without flaw, Studio 8 chased the platonic ideal of Souls-like DLC, and while they may not have accomplished everything they set out to do, it's still a damn good DLC, and I can't wait to see what they're going to do next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Hopefully it's less of a wait.